Greetings, my friends. My name is Kaleb Saucer, and I am privileged to be sitting today with a friend of mine, Brother Darin Sargent, who is the author of a best-selling book called
Best-
Battle of the Beast.
Yes.
And I have no qualms about describing that as a best-selling book.
It's done good.
It's been a great book.
Yeah.
But today we're not here to talk about Battle of the Beast. We're here
No,
to talk
we already
about
did that.
his most recent book that is just being released called Parenting with Purpose. It describes 5 foundations for shaping the next generation. And the way we're going to approach this conversation, we're going to talk about the book, Brother Sargent,
Okay.
but really we're going to talk about parenting. We're going to
Yeah.
talk about some of the lessons that you learned from being a parent, now a grandparent,
Oh,
and
yikes.
we'll weave some content about
Okay.
the book through the course of this
Sure.
conversation. But maybe as a way of just introducing yourself to the audience to get us into the conversation, tell us a little bit about your family.
Okay. Well, I am the oldest of 3 boys raised by Harold and Judy Sargent. We were raised in the wonderful area of southern Idaho, right outside of Twin Falls, Idaho, in a little community, farming community named Kimberly, Idaho. I talk about it a little bit in the book, but and being born with only one hand, being the firstborn specifically, no doubt it was a challenge for my parents.
Sure.
I mean, how do you deal with that?
Sure.
I mean, they didn't have 1 or 2 kids to practice on. I was the first one, and here I come into life with what many would consider a disability. But my parents looked at this as an opportunity to really forge something in me. And being raised by Harold and Judy Sargent, my dad specifically, not one time, Brother Kaleb, did I ever hear my father say I couldn't do something.
Yeah.
Now, he never made excuses for me. He didn't try to compensate, but he let me face it. And he let me learn from the challenges and the mistakes that I made.
Yeah.
And so I brought into my family, once my wife and I got married and started having children, this idea that you have to intentionally form the structure, the clay that God has given to us in our children. And I had such an incredible upbringing and an example of what that looked like. Now, did we do everything right? Absolutely not.
Sure.
No, I mean, parenting is, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but parenting is, I think God gives us kids to teach us things while we're trying to teach our children things.
Yeah.
But I brought so much into both my wife and I into our marriage when children started being raised. Just this idea of intentionality, of trying to make sure that we're putting the right stuff into them.
Yeah, I love that. So I think what I'm hearing you say is your starting point because of what you saw modeled.
Yeah.
And it's what we have to work with. Now, having heard you and your wife talk, it sounds like y'all's upbringings were vastly different.
Yeah.
On one side, you saw an incredible example that you could just lay the foundation and build on. Maybe share just a little bit, not necessarily her whole story,
Sure.
but the differences that you brought into marriage.
And so this is interesting. And we talk a lot about this when we're doing family and marriage talks and retreats or whatever. My wife saw a side of parenting that she did not want to replicate. I saw something that I wanted to further.
Right.
And I'm not saying my mom and dad were absolutely perfect,
Certainly.
but I mean, my wife didn't see that. She didn't have that. What she had was the glimpse of those in the church that she attended as a child that she could point to and say, that's the kind of family I want.
Yeah.
That's the kind of marriage I want. That's the type of children I want to raise. She tells stories at 9 years of age. And to have the presence of mind, even at 9, I've questioned her. I said, how did you? She goes, I just knew that something was different that I wanted to model when I got older. And as she became a teenager and through a lot of challenges that her family faced, she was able to take those things and say, okay, this is not what I'm bringing forward.
Yeah.
But we're going to do something different. So there was challenges. There were things that I think she had to adjust when when I would present discipline in the home, her idea of discipline was totally different than what I grew up with. So there was a trepidation in her. Like, okay, hold on, Darin, slow down. Whereas this was what I knew.
Yeah.
And I was trying to carry it forward. So we had to work through some of that. A little bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But it was good.
But I think right out of the gate, that's just a hopeful statement, because no doubt people who are watching this, there's going to be some that you came from an incredible upbringing where you say, now I'm just replicating what I saw modeled in my home. But I'm going to argue there's probably even more.
Absolutely.
That maybe you say, I'm having to overcome what I saw in home, and I'm having to learn to give what I didn't receive myself.
Yeah.
So right out of the gate, no matter what the story is, the reality is we get to carve our own legacy, and legacy's got to start somewhere. Well, we're going to get to legacy at the end of this conversation, but just a little foreshadowing here, legacy's got to start somewhere. Absolutely. So whether you were raised in a home where this was modeled, or whether you were raised in a home where you are trying to jump over it, the reality is each of us as parents have the opportunity to chart a new path forward for our family.
True.
Now, you talked about your parents.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your kids and now West of the Blue.
Yeah. So we're at a different stage of our life, and having been in ministry now for, approaching, getting close to, yikes, 38, 39 years. Ouch. That hurts.
Say it like it's a great thing.
38
years of experience.
38 years of experience.
Nothing wrong with that.
We are, I saw the need. We have so many things against us as parents, young parents in this generation. You and your wife Ellery are doing such a phenomenal job. And I've told you before, but I'll tell you publicly on this video, I stand back and applaud you, because you're both are very intentional, and thank you for that. But a lot of people they're trying to figure out how to do that.
Sure.
How do we raise our children? And so looking back now at some of the things we did, some of the things that we learned, some of the things we didn't do, I felt the need to write this. So our firstborn, his name is Carson. In July, he'll be 30.
Okay.
It's hard to believe, but he'll be 30 years of age this year. And then there's Ashton. Carson is married to the lovely Emily. No children yet, but we're hopeful. We're believing God for that to happen.
You do have a grand dog.
Right. Grand dog.
A grand dog?
They got him a Dalmatian.
Okay.
A Dalmatian that is named Butter.
Okay.
And it's like a kid. I don't know why they did it, but they did.
Anyway, maybe that's the next step, is being a grand dog parent. Yeah.
But then there's Ashton. Ashton is married to the exceptional young man by the name of Hunter, gave us our first grandchild, little Wesley. That's a whole new level and discussion that we may need to do another hour or so on that one. And then we have our youngest, Avery, who is 23, just graduated last year from Indiana Bible College and doing her thing. And I'll talk a little more about Ashton and Hunter and Wesley maybe as we get toward the end. But I think with our children, we had I don't know how to put it other than there were decisive moments in their upbringing where there was a shift.
Okay.
You go from the young toddler age to that kindergarten, first grade. I remember, you probably,
I think it right now.
Yeah. I remember dropping Carson off for kindergarten and thinking, this is happening. I mean, he is no longer under my umbrella, so to speak. Now he's going to be influenced by others. And we can talk all about that later. But so it's interesting. There's these just moments. And then you get into teenage years and they go insane. Y'all know what I'm talking about. They kind of go crazy for a little bit. And you're like, oh, dear God. What did we create? Is this gonna work? Fortunately, we were solidified, Dewana and I, and this is important. Husbands and wives, you have to be solidified. You have to be a united front, because they are going to test every line you draw, and those battle lines are important.
Yeah. So, well, let's do this. Let's zoom out 30,000 foot view, and then we'll start trying to to kind of get into some of the weeds as we go in this conversation. You have 3 kids, now 1 grandbaby. It sounds like there's maybe 7 years difference between your oldest and your youngest, between Carson and Avery. And a young parent season, when you first have these kids, I think we're somewhat idealistic about what parenting is going to be like. We hear everybody else say the sleepless nights, the discipline conversations, picking schools for your kid. You hear everybody else's struggles, and then until you're in it, it's like, maybe it surely can't be that hard. It can't be that. But even our vision of success. Okay. I'm curious if your definition of successful parenting has changed through the years. That as a young parent,
successful parenting is about providing a secure base for children.
Thank you, Siri.
She
gave us the definition.
I guess Siri was in. Wow.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
But I want to hear your voice, not Siri's.
Yeah, exactly.
Has your vision of what effective, successful parenting, has that changed through the years? So maybe as a young parent, you had a view, but now stepping back in the season that you're in, you say, you know what? It actually looks like this.
Absolutely. I think sometimes as young parents, we're so concerned about what others think of our children and how it makes us look. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
I think you're like, okay, we got to control their behavior so it doesn't come back on us. Looking back now, I wish I would have been less concerned about what others thought and more concerned about what was actually being built in my child and not being worried about mistakes. Not being worried that they would maybe embarrass me.
my reputation or image.
Exactly. And I think that's a real struggle.
I think that makes sense.
It's a real struggle for parents because we put a lot of demands, as you said, they tell this, okay, here's the challenges. The sleepless nights, those are important. I get it. You're tired, you're cranky because of it, but that's not the real challenge. The real challenge is when what you're trying to instill within your children is being challenged by a culture, by influences that you have to hope and pray that you put enough in them that when that challenge comes, they're able to make the right decision. To me, that's successful parenting. When what I've placed, and I have so many examples of what we did right and even what we did wrong. But when that challenge comes and your child is able to stand on their own and say, you know what? I was taught something different. I'm not going to go this direction. That to me is what success is.
That's the view of success.
It's
incredibly important, particularly for those of you who are listening, and maybe you're in the season of life I'm in. I've got a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a year and a half, a baby that's a year and a half. And it can be hard to have a long view some days because the days really are long.
They are.
So in my season, success looks like we survived today. Okay, nobody died. Everybody got fed. We didn't lose a kid out and about. We survived today. And at times it can be hard to have that long view where, 20 years from now, I want to be able to say that today mattered.
Absolutely.
Because I did something that reinforced what the long vision, what I'm trying to put inside my kids. Not just that they were fed healthy food today, but did I do something to invest in their long-term future?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. I've heard, and you even alluded to it, with marriage and with parenting, I've heard it framed, what if God's intention there wasn't necessarily to make us happy, but to make us holy? And we talk about that in the confines of marriage often, that marriage is a refining process.
Yes, it is.
I am convinced that as refining as marriage is, parenting is equally refining, if not more.
I would almost say it's more.
Okay.
And the reason why is parenting really establishes your family foundation.
Okay.
It lets people know this is who and what they are.
This is what we're about.
This is what we're
committed to.
This is it. I make a statement in the book, the long days give way to short years. And you're going to be sooner than you want to.
I get it.
Experience it. You're going to be where I'm at. And you're going to be looking back on Easton and say, man, Adley, oh man, Beckham, wow. They're graduating from high school. They're getting married. And I think it changes what truly matters in your life. When children come into the picture and you start raising, what's the most important thing?
Sure. And if we're not intentional about it,
Absolutely.
it goes to the whole discipleship conversation. It's not a question of whether we're discipling our kids.
Yeah.
But it's a question of how. What are we pointing them?
Absolutely.
What are we pointing them toward?
Because you're training them in something.
Something. We're pointing them towards something. And whether that's intentional or whether it's happenstance. And then we're surprised whenever they don't end up where we were wanting to target. In fact, let's segue there. In the book, you reference several times the verse that describes children as arrows. And you flesh this out throughout the course of the book, starting in Deuteronomy 6, but then talk a little bit about that concept and in this idea of this intentional pointing our children in a specific direction and launching them into the future that God has for them.
Yeah, it's something that I really felt like would be the backbone of this book, because arrows may look nice hung on the wall and nice decorations, all fancy, but arrows are only useful when they're released.
Sure.
That is, I'm just going to be honest with you, that is the hardest thing to do as a parent. At least it was, let me just say for us, for Dewana and I, that's tough. That probably harder on me than it is my wife. But it's releasing them. And here's the cool thing about arrows. Arrows launched and released go farther than you're able to go.
Sure.
And they hit targets beyond your reach, but it's only good. And I think we talk a little bit about in this book about that tension, because, I'm not a very good example of what it looks like to do an arrow, bow and arrow, but when you pull that arrow back, there's that tension. Tension has to be there.
Yeah.
We don't like the tension, but it's what's used to bring the arrow out beyond your reach.
Sure.
And so I have a good example of this that just happened recently. So I get the final proof of this book.
Okay.
And our editor gives it to me to look over one more time. And I'm reading it. It was a Monday night. I go through the book as fast as I can. I'm looking at areas. I get to the last couple chapters. It's not the last chapter. I think it's the second to last chapter. It's about releasing the arrow. And my daughter Ashton and her husband Hunter, along with my grandson, they had been living in our basement for about 8-9 months, trying to figure out what God was doing. They moved out of their apartment and was living with it. It was great. I every day I get to see my grandson. You can't beat that. It was great. I'm not a big proponent of everyone living with. I won't go into that discussion, but it's what needed to happen.
Sure.
They were looking for their direction, trying to figure it out. And so I'm finishing up this chapter, reading, releasing the arrows. And it's about just allowing our kids to go. When Hunter and Ashton walk into my office, less than 20 minutes, Kaleb.
Okay.
I think I told you the story. Less than 20 minutes of me finishing it. They look at me, and I could tell they've got something on their mind and say, "Hey, Dad, Hunter just got a job offer in Seattle. It looks like we're going to be making the move." And I'll be honest with you, they could tell by the look on my face that I was like, the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
And we knew it was, they were been praying about it.
Coming.
We've been talking about it. They talked to you about it. They talked to others about it. We knew it was coming. But at that moment, I started to cry a little bit.
Sure.
And Ashton was joining me. She's definitely my child. And I said, okay, well, here we go. Just talked a little bit. When they walked out, I said, "God," he goes, "You wrote the chapter, dude." This is what we raised them for.
Yeah.
And I find great joy in knowing that my children are walking in truth and fulfilling what God called them. If I had my way, Wesley Blue would be in this room with me
absolutely.
right now.
Yeah.
He was in town last week. We got to go to the zoo. Oh, we had a great time. He's Papa's buddy. But I understand that I raised her.
If you've done your job right, Yeah.
That's the bottom line. I have to trust that what Dewana and I did was enough.
Sure.
Well, Ashton, as I said, was in last week. She flies home. I'd given her a copy. The book just came in. I gave her a copy. She texts me the next day. She says, Dad, try not to get emotional.
Do your thing.
Said, Dad, I read the entire book on the plane. She said, it was so beautiful. Thank you. She goes, I may have cried on the last couple of chapters. Sure. So thank you for the way that you and Ma raised us. That's enough.
Yeah. You can't beat that.
Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah.
That even in the mistakes that we may have made along the way, they got something.
Yeah.
That has carried her. And now she's a beautiful wife. She's a beautiful mom. She's doing phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful.
Let me, I didn't prep you for this question. But you mentioned the mistakes made along the way. For every parent, there are days where you just feel like I fail way more than I succeed.
Yeah.
I lost my temper again.
Yeah.
I stepped outside of the values that I want my kids to display again. It's every parent. We feel like
Absolutely.
we're tripping over ourselves. Trying even the most intentional parent.
Sure.
What role does grace play in parents?
Oh man, that's a great question, Kaleb. You have to practice grace because number one, God gives you grace.
Yeah.
And I get a little concerned when I see parents that are they don't let that moment become a teaching moment of the power of the grace of God.
Sure.
And
Both for themselves and their kid.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think sometimes
Even more so.
it's more so for us.
Yeah.
I watched my dad in seasons where I made mistakes, just his ability to say, okay, this was wrong. You were wrong. But this is what we're going to do with this now.
Sure.
That's grace. Grace is basically the power and desire to do the will of God. Grace is taking the moment and extending it, of course, but also not just extending grace and then forget about it. Let's take the lessons from that moment and shape it. And I write about this in Battle of the Beast, about a moment in my life when my dad just spoke a word in a very challenging season of my life. And it was a grace-filled moment. He gave grace to me to own it.
Yeah.
And that's key. Grace doesn't just wash things away.
Right.
Doesn't just overlook, doesn't sugarcoat it. No, real grace is saying, okay, you're going to be okay, but we're going to pick up and we're going to learn some lessons from this.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the important thing here is extending your kids grace, and also extending yourself grace.
Because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to say, to your point, you're going to say the wrong things.
Yeah.
You're going to speak the wrong words that you didn't mean to say. You're going to act in ways, and you're going to have to, and be okay.
And I rest in
saying
the
sorry.
fact that yes,
I'm sorry.
apologize and being
Apologize.
the first one to apologize.
Yeah.
But resting in the fact that if His grace is sufficient for me, His grace is also going to be sufficient for my kids, even if I'm the one that they need grace from sometimes. So
Absolutely.
okay, let's go back. So we're talking the end goal is legacy. The end goal is releasing them into the future that God has for them. But that moment of release is likely set up. What we do years before that moment matters.
Absolutely.
So I think it's chapter 2. You talk about the mission of Moses. And you use this to kind of set up the intentional daily routines and rhythms of everyday life and just what a family life and culture can look like. Talk to me a little bit about that mission of Moses.
Sure.
And then make it practical, where for parents who are in those years, they're not in your season. They're either in my season, maybe a little ahead of me, where they've got kids that are teenagers. But how do we leverage those everyday moments that layer upon layer upon layer set us up for the day when it's time and the moment's there and we release the arrow?
You know, Moses is such an incredible example of really trying to get families to see the intentionality of what they do daily.
Yeah.
Because, you know, to your point, Deuteronomy 6, you talk about this when you're walking in the way, when you lie down, when you get up in the morning. You know, I kind of put it in the book, when you're eating Captain Crunch, when you're just in the throes of everyday life, try to be intentional enough that you are imparting truths from God's word, from the Spirit of God, that you're going to have to repeat them.
Sure.
You're going to have to repeat them. But Moses does such a good, I'm just going to quote from my book, Moses' call to teach diligently wasn't about adding more to a parent's to-do list. I think sometimes we think that way. Can you check it off?
Sure.
Bible reading, check. Prayer, check. Church attendance, check. No, it was about living with an eternal focus, seeing every ordinary moment as an opportunity to impart the truth of God to the next generation. And I think we have to slow down long enough to recognize that everything we're facing or we're dealing with could be a teachable moment.
Yeah.
You and I were talking a few months ago. You were talking about an incident you and Easton had, and how you took it while he's in the back seat, if I remember correctly.
Sure.
You're driving down the road, and you use that moment to teach some things to your child. Well, that's kind of crazy. They're only 4 or 5 years old. Oh no.
Yeah.
So I think Moses is trying to get them to really slow down and recognize, because there was a couple things that they were going to be facing. They were going to go into a land of abundance, and Moses knew that. He wasn't able to go with them, so he was teaching them. From Deuteronomy 4 to 11, he's heavy. He's repeating these words. Do not forget. Remember,
Right.
Do not forget. Remember, do not forget. 15, 16 times he is saying, don't forget, because there's going to come a day when you're going to be abundant. You're going to be in a land of abundance. You're going to be blessed. You're going to have houses you did not build, vineyards you did not plant, because that's when it's going to become difficult, because you're not going to need God.
Sure.
Or think you need God.
Yeah.
At that moment. So you have got to put these things in, because when those challenges come, when those idols show up, and he deals a lot with idols, when those idols, and I don't want to get into all that, but we set up a lot of idols that trip our children up, and we think it's, well, I didn't get to do this as a kid, so I'm going to live vicariously through my child, and he's going to be able to do that. She's going to be able to do this. We got to be careful. I'm not saying extracurricular activities are wrong.
Right.
But I'm saying we have to guard, because what is coming into their future cannot be pushed back against without some strong biblical, spiritual foundation.
Yeah.
That starts not at church,
Right.
starts in the home.
Absolutely. So
Starts in the home.
let's make this real practical.
Okay.
Deuteronomy 6, it's teach and talk.
Yeah.
Okay. Teach them diligently, and then talk about them when you're eating Captain Crunch. It's everyday routines and rhythms of life. Think back to when the kids were in your home. What are some very practical things that you tried to do as a parent?
Sure.
And maybe parse it out, because what I'm doing when my kids are 6 and below is going to look different than what I'm doing with a preteen. It will look different than when I have teenagers in the house. And so what are some practical things that parents could implement that help lay that foundation of everyday discipleship?
I think for me, and what my wife and I really made a stand for was, and this seems very simple, but it is, but it's practical. Dinner time was a very important time. My wife grew up in a home where you grabbed your TV tray and you went and sat in another room, or you went and watched television. I didn't grow up with a television. And Idaho, we didn't have a whole lot, but we did have potatoes. And my mom knew how to make potatoes in many different forms and fashions. But that was a central part of the home I grew up in. And I wanted that to be a central part of our home. And so when dinner time was there, specifically when they were younger, it was very, very important. We're going to eat together as a family, and we're going to talk about the day. Okay. I don't care if it was kindergarten, first grade. We were going to talk. How was your day?
Yeah.
What did you learn today? What stuff did you do? What'd you do on recess? You know, that seems to be, it's simple stuff, but you're getting them to trust you in that talk portion of Moses's. There's a reason. Talk is relational.
Yeah.
It's me and you having this conversation. We're talking.
Yeah.
We're having a conversation. That's relational. We wanted to build that relational aspect so that when our children got older, it wasn't foreign to them to have a conversation with mom and dad.
Yeah.
Now, when they became teenagers, it changed because now they had school requirements. They worked. My kids worked,
Okay.
started working 15, 16 years of age. Okay. And so we had to get creative. One thing we did, because then when they got into those teenage years, all of a sudden,
Yeah. Access.
access.
Sure.
So we made a point, these do not belong at the table. We had a box that we put our stuff in because we didn't want notifications. Now, we were pastoring during this time. And that was a challenge, to be honest, for me, because it's amazing how the people in your church want access to you when you're sitting down. It's like that telemarketer.
They know exactly
It's like that
when you're on
telemarketer.
vacation,
Exactly.
when you're with your family, you're sitting down for a
Yeah.
meal.
So
Yeah.
we kind of made it a point, okay, we're not going to have distractions. We're going to talk. Now, there were some interesting and sometimes very challenging conversations. I can tell you a few times where I may have just said some things I probably shouldn't have said when my kids were expressing some frustrations that they had with with their mom and I, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I had to, but I wanted to practice this relational important. My wife and I both, I watch now, specifically my wife, her communication with her kids is beautiful. We're now on the backside of all those years of just being intentional about that talking.
Yeah.
Now, we had the teaching, we had all that, but that talking aspect, we're now.
You're reaping the benefits.
My wife and I got in last night. I was doing some work outside and get things cleaned up before the storm that we're supposed to get. I come in and here's my wife and my youngest daughter in the living room. The lights were out. The house, they were just having a conversation.
Yeah.
And they've been talking for 20, 30 minutes. It's about life.
Sure.
I'm thankful for that. But that doesn't just happen.
Yeah. You got to work it.
You got to work it.
My wife, she talks about in parenting this tension between control and influence.
Such a good thing. I've heard her say that.
Yeah, this idea that when we're in the younger stages of parenting, our kids are young, we have all the control. But I see it happening even in my 6-year-old. You talk about them going to kindergarten for the first time. And it's that
release.
first moment of, and it's only a partial release, but at
it's
the
still
same
tough.
time, you're
You're
like,
scared
oh
to
my
death.
gosh. Then they're developing a little bit of independence. And then having worked with young people for a number
Oh,
of
yeah.
years and talking to parents who are in that season, this idea of we've got all the control whenever they're young. But what we do when they're young, we're trying to play our cards right so that whenever they become Avery
Yeah.
and Carson and Ashton's age, then what we have is influence. We may not be able to control every decision,
Yeah.
but we still have positioned ourselves in a way where we've built relational bonds. They trust our voice, and we still maintain influence in their life.
I did something with my kids, probably more pronounced with Carson, my son. So when he turned 12, he was going into the youth group and he was leaving children's ministry.
Okay.
So I saved up some money and I said, we're going to do this right. I wrote a letter. We went to a Ruth's Chris Steakhouse.
Okay.
I brought Michael Gonzalez, who had been his children's pastor, and I brought David McGovern, who was going to be his youth pastor.
Sure.
And I had made this letter along with a list of 5 men that I trusted their voice. And then I contacted these 5 men. I said, listen, I really want to be dad in my kid's life.
Yeah.
I know I'm their spiritual leader. I get that. But here are these men that if my son needed a voice outside of his father, I trusted them.
Yeah.
If it was a heaven or hell issue or a life issue, they can contact me. If not, I know he had conversations that I, to this day, have no
You're not
idea.
privy to. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But we took him out there, and I had Mike speak into his life. I read the letter. I'm weeping in Bruce Chris. Mike says some, Carson, you've been a joy to have in children's ministry. And then David, and if you know David McGovern, very creative man, both those guys are. But David was like, he pulls out of his bag a VeggieTales coloring book
Okay.
and a set of crayons. And
Yeah.
Carson's like, I'm 12. I'm not a kid anymore. And David opens it up, pulls out a crayon, gives it to Carson. Carson's like, I can tell he's uncomfortable. And he says these words. He says, Carson, in your teenage years, as you step into the youth group, be as colorful as you can, but learn to color within the lines. And it was such a pivotal moment. because that's what parenting, you want your kids to express their independence.
Sure.
And their personality and their giftings and their callings, but you want to make sure that you're intentionally, you're purposefully.
You've drawn some lines.
You've drawn some lines.
Yeah, you've drawn
and
some
you
boundaries.
want to make sure that you're putting those lines. I'll never forget. So we homeschooled for a little bit, and then our kids went into a homeschool charter, quasi-charter type environment, and high school was 4 days a week. Well, Carson went to his freshman year. Well, he started to form the wrong relationships.
Okay.
And we had to make a decision, and we pulled him out his sophomore year and homeschooled him. It was the most difficult. And I know he didn't appreciate it at the time. Sure. But now he thanks us.
Yeah.
He went back in his junior and senior year, but we had to pull him back because there were some influences that were encroaching some of the things that we believed. And it was a tough decision to make.
I could see that.
It was a prayerful decision that we had to make. Many times my wife and I had to discuss it. Are we going to do this?
Yeah.
What's it going to do to him?
Yeah.
And
But at the same time,
I'm thankful we did it.
nothing's worth the cost of our kids' souls.
I'm not willing to have that trade-off.
So you've talked a few things here, but looking back, what is one thing that now that your kids are growing out of the house, what is one thing you are so grateful you prioritized as a family?
I think that those family moments and vacations, I'll just be honest. Church is important, of course. And I talk a lot about, Moses' whole deal. He really zeroes in on that home.
Yeah.
We think if we can just take our kids to church, it's enough. Church only has them. You know this statistic. Sure. You just talked about this at our Cultivate conference. We have to intentionally prioritize those moments. So we created moments through what was at home and through vacation. And sometimes we didn't have the money to go on vacations.
We're going to go make a memory.
We're going to make a memory.
Yeah.
And my kids, when we gather together, and this is going to sound sacrilegious, they don't talk about the conferences we went to.
Right.
Us taking them to because of the times, or us taking them to general conference or camp meeting. Those are all important.
Yeah.
Okay. Youth camps. I'm a big proponent of youth camps.
Absolutely.
But what they talk about
Go
and
make
what we talk about when I get with my brothers, we talk about those trips to skiing in Jackson Hole, going through Yellowstone and Yosemite, and those things that we got to do as kids. Those are the things that my kids, Dad, we're talking about this week with my mother-in-law just passed, and we have memories that are popping up now in our feeds on social media about the vacations that she took with us. Those are the things that I am thankful we sacrificed and did. Sometimes we didn't have the money.
Yeah.
But we tried to make a memory because those are the things that our kids are now talking about, and they're trying to duplicate.
Sure.
In their families.
And it's built that foundation of
Yes,
relational
absolutely.
credibility you can
Absolutely.
make. A couple more questions. We'll start
Okay.
bringing this to a close. In the book, your last section here, because you talk about 5 foundations. You talk about loving, learning, living, leading, but then you talk about leaving a legacy.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, legacy has to start somewhere, regardless of what your past family situation may look like. It can change in your future family because of your intentionality as a parent. But for you, when did you first start thinking about legacy, and what shaped your perspective about what you wanted your family legacy to be?
When I saw this question and knowing that you were going to ask me that, I really started to try to pinpoint a time. I think I really started thinking about legacy. We were building what we could at him from a young age, but around the age of our firstborn, when he was about probably 10,
Okay.
I'll be honest with you, because I got to thinking, okay, we're doing all this with intentionality as best as we can, but now the reason why we were doing this started to come into fuller focus.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking, I've got 10 years, I've got 7 years, I've got,
You're seeing the sand fall in the hourglass.
that's when it started to click. And then I'll be honest, it really ramped up when they go into high school.
Okay.
Because now you're having to combat some of the things that they're being taught I'm having to, okay, we would discuss them. And I'm thinking, okay, if I don't get this right,
Yeah.
5 years from now, when they're in college, wherever God sends them, they're not going to have the right tools. So I think legacy has to deal with not just the thought of it, but putting the tools in the hands of our children that they could use when those challenges come.
I like that.
And I think, I don't know if I can pinpoint an exact moment. It may have been earlier, but it seems like to me that 8, 9, 10-year-old stage, I'm really starting to think, oh man,
Yeah.
it's gone this fast already. How much faster?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you start thinking about. You start thinking about the speed of life. It's just, I'm 50, none of your old business now. And I'm just like, wow, where did it go?
Yeah.
So I think then is when it really started to hit for me.
So for those who are watching, regardless of what season you're in, I think the truth is you will rarely hit a target that you didn't aim for.
Yeah.
Like you may unintentionally, your kids, yes, they can overcome any bad example that you have lived out in front of them, and God's grace is sufficient. But so much better that we have laid a foundation for them to build on. And maybe a question that you could ask yourself. I've asked Darin a bunch of questions today, but a question you could wrestle with yourself is 30 years from now, what are the stories I want being told around my dinner table by the generations that are behind me? What are those things I want us to celebrate? What do I want the legacy of my family to be as a result of my influence? So let's close with this question. Anything else you want to say? But if you could go back in time and you could sit with your younger self and you could tell your younger self as a parent one thing, what would be the encouragement you would give to your younger parenting self?
Be okay with the day today. Stay in that moment as long as you can. And recognize that every day is an important day.
Yeah.
There may be nothing that really, but I look back now and I think, man, if I had one more day with Carson at 11, what would we do?
Yeah.
Just take advantage of the day. Don't think, okay, I can't wait till they're out of school, or I can't wait till next year. I can't wait till they can drive. I can't wait. No, stay in the day, stay in the moment, and just really thank God for it. And I would say, ask God for wisdom for the day, not for the next 5 years, just for the day.
Yeah.
Because there's things that you will face today. And I would pray too, this just, thinking about it now, I would pray that God would give me insight for that day.
Yeah.
Every day I would pray, God, help me see today in the lives of my children what it's supposed to be.
I love it. That compounding interest
is just
day upon day,
what
seems like small moments years later are contributing to the legacy of the family.
So good.
And the direction that we're going to ultimately show our kids' lives.
Yeah.
If you are interested in learning more, an incredible book, Parenting with Purpose by Darin Sargent, you can find your copy at pentecostalpublishing.com or also available at Amazon. The encouragement I would make to you is, while you will find much value in going through this yourself, if you are a parent who is parenting alongside a spouse, I would encourage you to don't go through this just by yourself, but make sure that you're doing this as a couple and you're marking this book up and talking about the principles. But even beyond that, I'd encourage you to get a group of your friends together that are maybe in a similar season of life, a small group in your church, and let this be the center of conversation where we don't just hope that we unintentionally stumble into legacy, but instead let's have some intentional conversations today. Let's chart out what we want the future to look like. And then let's work backwards to say, here's the practical steps, the day-to-day steps of teaching and talking and modeling and living out our faith that can ultimately lay a foundation so that our kids can be shot in a direction that will far outlive us. Brother Sargent, thank you.
Thank you, bro.
For the conversation. Thank you for your investment in us through this book. We pray God's blessings on you, on your family. And again, pick up this copy, pentecostalpublishing.com or at Amazon, and you will be blessed by it. God bless you all.
Thank you.